There we go. Hi, I'm Lori. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Jay, for inviting me to share tonight. I'm really glad to be here with all of you. There's 105 people in this room, and that tells me I'm in the right place. This is a good meeting, I can already tell. Jay's at the helm. I've seen Phil around before, so I'm in good company. Ah, my story is sometimes tear wrenching, so I might cry. I have my tissues here. Sometimes there's a lot of laughter in it, me mainly, laughing at myself. I don't know what direction it's going to take today, but I know that you will leave here feeling filled up. So stay with me throughout the ride, please. I'm grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous for my life today. AA has saved my life and has continued again and again to save my life. When I first got here, it was in the summer of 2009. So it hasn't been all that long, 14 years and a few months. And I had read a story, probably in People magazine. I was probably drunk when I read this story. It was about a woman named Diane Schuler who lived in New York, and she got on the Taconic going the wrong way. And in her minivan, she had her two children, her three nieces, all probably under the age of 9, if I remember correctly. And her oldest niece called her mom and said something's wrong with Aunt Diane. And there was a terrible crash. And Diane Schuler hit another oncoming vehicle that was going the right way on the Taconic. And those 2 or 3 men, I don't remember if it was 2 or 3, killed instantly. Her 3 nieces killed instantly. She was killed, and one of her children was killed. I think her son, who might have been 4 or 3 at the time, survived, the only survivor. And something about reading that story made me think, this is going to be my story unless I get help from my drinking. They had found an empty bottle of vodka, I believe, underneath the seat. They had found, when they did the toxicology, they found alcohol in her system and marijuana as well. And she was on a camping trip with her nieces and her children, and her husband was driving a separate car and had left the campsite earlier. And the interesting thing about this story is that nobody knew that she was an alcoholic, that she was carrying this on in secrecy. Must have rung true to me because that's how I drank. And I also felt some familiarity with the idea that I often had 5 kids in my car. My sister, who has 3 boys, and I have 2. My sister was in and out of Department of Children and Family Services, and this is not the case with Diane Schuler's family, but I was often the caretaker for 5 children at a time, and I felt stressed, and I felt I needed to drink to get through the day. It was hard having 5 boys. For me, it was under the age of 12, and life was insane, and I thought the only way I could manage it is by drinking and using. I read that story and I realized how terrible that would be, to accidentally kill my own children and my nephews, in my case. And then I felt the horror of everybody would know I was an alcoholic, and that pridefulness about my drinking and my using, and how I was using with abandon and to oblivion so frequently that I decided to get help. So I didn't go to a meeting first. I tried to find a workaround. I went online and I Googled mothers who drink too much. And I found this really beautiful message board on Yahoo, and it was called the Booze Free Brigade. And I read through all of their, inspiring stories. And lo and behold, every single one of those women on those stories said, well, I went to a 12-step meeting, I went to AA, and I'm like, can't avoid it. So I walked into my first meeting in the summer of 2009, and I'm embarrassed, but this is the case for many of us. I don't remember if it was July or August. I really don't. I was fuzzy in those days, but I did feel welcome, even though I felt so much shame sitting in those rooms. I went to the rooms, and I sat in the back, and I prayed that I wouldn't see anyone I would recognize. I was a suffering alcoholic who didn't understand the disease of alcoholism. And thank God I stuck around long enough to realize that I was very sick, and I'm recovering today, and I'm not a suffering alcoholic today. I still identify as an alcoholic because I need to remind myself when and if I think that I can drink or use like a normal person, I have to remember that I have a cunning and fatal and progressive disease that today I'm not suffering from, but I'm not guaranteed tomorrow unless I continue on the maintenance of my spiritual program, which is what I've learned how to do through these steps. So when I got here, I was 39. I was miserable. I was often seen as the most responsible person in my extended family. So I was the caretaker often for my parents. My father had been and was a heroin user for many, many years, never found us, never found the programs. He went into treatment several times. My mother, undiagnosed mental health issues. My sister, clearly chaotic in and out of the court systems and often lost custody of her children and ultimately lost permanent custody of those three boys. I'm sorry for the barking dogs. Hopefully you can't hear it as loud as I can. They're my guardians. What I do realize is that I needed you guys far before I found you, but I'm glad that I found you. And that I'm glad that I was beat up enough by alcohol to be willing to listen. And I was sharing just before the meeting started, my first miracle that happened in these rooms was I started to hear, instead of just hearing my own voice, my own fears, my own paranoia, whatever it was bouncing around between my ears, I started to really be interested in you all and your stories. And for some reason, I believed you. A lot of the time, you told me some of the things you had been through in your drinking and then through sobriety. And I was riveted, and it was compelling stories. I mean, we are some hardcore people in here. And I mean that in recovery too. There are some warriors in these rooms, some of the toughest and best people I know I've met through Alcoholics Anonymous. But for whatever reason, the 1 hour I was in a meeting, I didn't want to drink and I didn't feel like I needed to drink. So I went to meetings every day. The obsession to drink didn't leave me immediately. That kind of bummed me out. It was suggested that I pray for the obsession or the cravings to be lifted. I didn't do that. I wouldn't go that far. Not in my early sobriety. No. I was content prior to investigation, right? I did not trust prayer. I did not trust higher power. I didn't know what your higher power was, but wasn't going to trust your higher power. So I was adamant doing it my own way. So I frankly came in here and white knuckled it at the same time. But I didn't drink. I tried not to drink between meetings. However, I decided, well, don't say anything about weed in the program, in the steps in the big book that I've read so far, know it all that I am. And so I continued to smoke for a little while. And in the first week of March in 2010, I had gotten a sponsor and she said, hey, you don't have to identify. You're not under 90 days anymore. And I said, I have to talk to you after the meeting. And that was my second spiritual awakening or miracle in this program. I decided to tell her the truth. And I said, Jenny, I don't know if it counts, but I haven't put down the weed. I'm still smoking. I haven't had a drink. Does this need to, do I need to restart my days? And she said, that's entirely up to you. How sober do you want to be? And I love that she didn't tell me. I love that she gave me permission to own my own recovery. And that was a miracle. And I said, yeah, I think I can't do this program and be smoking weed. I don't think that's sobriety for me. And she says, okay, when's the last time you smoked? And I said, March 8th. It was like, 2 days ago or whatever. And she said, okay, how about March 9th is your sobriety date? So my sobriety date is March 9th, 2010. And that's the day I surrendered to alcohol and all drugs. And I decided to surrender to this program and to see if this could relieve me of the insanity in my brain, of the need to know everything, of the need to be okay, for other people to be okay, for me to be okay. And shortly after, I made a decision to pray for the obsession to be lifted. So somewhere around April or May, the obsession was lifted. Prayer does work. I was just not willing, We're willing when we're willing. So my process of getting sober was gradual as I look back on the early days. I was miserable a lot. I hid out in meetings. I didn't go to I didn't go to women's meetings at first. I don't think I went to a women's only meeting until I was about 5 years sober, but I did find some fun fellowship, like this musicians group out of Venice Beach, California. And I was the roadie for a while, and I had these two young kids at home, 6 and 8, and my husband was working full time and I was staying at home. And come Friday, I needed out of that house. And lovingly, my husband let me go to these meetings in the evenings. And I would go to a meeting on Friday night, and it was like going out with friends on Friday night. And it's amazing. Here we are at a meeting on a Friday night. Like, the week's over, we got a party. Oh wait, I can't drink. I want to be with people that get me, that see me, and that can laugh. And it was a really joyous fellowship meeting. We didn't talk a lot about the steps, but the traditions were upheld, and we played music. And I got to eventually work my way up to sound person. And then I became secretary for a year of that meeting, and met a lot of musicians, and eventually volunteered a lot with Music Cares, an organization out here in Los Angeles that works with keeping musicians sober on tour when they go on tour and they need to stay sober. So I've always been of service, even though I wasn't a great AA and working the steps right away. But my recovery has been gradual. My father got really, really sick in my second or third year, and he ended up passing away. And that night that he died, I had the feeling like, oh, shoot, I'm never going to get amends from this guy, am I? He's never going to work the program. He's never going to work the steps. I'm not going to get the amends. And I called a friend, and they said, I'll meet you at a meeting. And so I learned, whatever's coming up in our lives, we can go to a meeting. We can hear the message of hope and love that's in this room. And somehow it helped me through the death. My dad was 89. He was an old junkie. I knew he was going to die. And a part of me was very relieved that he wasn't alive anymore, because his life got really sad and ugly at the end. And it was hard to love him and watch him where he was living and what his life looked like. But that anger and that resentment, I knew that I could work a 4-step on my dad. And I knew I could continue to work 10 steps around resentments that came up. All the tools for living, it turns out, are in the steps and working the steps, which is so beautiful. It's really a divinely inspired program. And I found a job that I loved for the first time, that I realized I would work for free. I learned how to say yes, to commitments. I learned when AA asks something of you, you show up, like set up the chairs at a meeting, or wash the coffee cups, or we didn't empty ashtrays in California because we didn't smoke in meetings when I came in 2009 and 10, but I put away the sound equipment, and I was at the meeting at 7:30 to set up and 11:30 to break it down at night. And that learning how to say yes allowed me to say yes to a friend outside of the program who said, I really want to get back into my fitness, and and I have to go to a spin class. And I had contempt prior to investigation. I do not want to go to a spin class. First of all, I know everything. They play crappy music. They're going to yell at me through their little microphone, and I don't like sweating. I don't want to go in a room where everyone's wooing. And but I cared about this friend, and I said, yes, I'll go with you, because I knew it would get her in the class, and I know it was important to her. A week later, I bought a package, a 10-class package to that same gym. And a few months after that, the owner of the gym came up to me and said, it looks like you're really enjoying the class. I'd like to tell you about our teachers training that we'll be doing in a few weeks. And I'd like to invite you to take that teachers training. You'd be certified to teach spinning as well as yoga for athletes. And I said, oh, that's so nice, but I'm 42. I'm too old for that. And she said, the woman who just taught your class is 50. I'm 54, and I just kicked your butt in the class. What's your problem with that? And I said, let me talk to my husband. Let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. And so at 42, I became a spin instructor, and it was the best job I ever had in my life. I got to talk about my life, and I got to pep people up using AA phrases I became the woman on the microphone saying, yes, you can, and you're not alone, and we can do this. And I got to learn everything I learned in AA. I got to plug into my class. I was really afraid to teach yoga because I didn't think I had enough qualifications. I didn't think I was ready. Spinning, it's a systematic formula that we would do. But they said, you're ready. We need you to teach this Tuesday class. And I went in, and it was a really kind of empty class, 6 or 7 people. And I said, oh, phew, okay, I can do this. And I had my little cue cards. and forgot to pray, forgot to ask higher power to be with me before that. But this man walked in and he was missing an arm. And my mind went crazy. And I said, oh my God, I haven't learned any modifications for people that don't have an arm. And how am I going to do plow and shoulder stand? And so I found myself obsessing and saying the name arm or hand over and over. And it was just falling over myself until I went over to help him with an adjustment. And then I almost fell on him. And afterwards, I laughed at myself. This was my higher power's way of saying, don't take yourself too seriously, kid. I apologized to the man with one arm. I asked him about how he lost his arm. He was an MMA fighter. He knew exactly what he was doing. There's no one who's going into a yoga class that doesn't know how to take care of his own body with body modifications. But my higher power thought that I needed some humor in my life. So he sent me a one-armed arm man. No matter how many years of yoga training I would have had, I would have never been prepared for that. But I've been gently and sometimes hilariously guided to continue to know that it's not up to me to solve everybody's problems, to be the perfect sponsor, to be the perfect sister or daughter or yoga instructor. It's just to become willing to make mistakes, to ask for help when I need it, to be honest, to be able to know that I'm teachable is one of the great miracles. I came in here knowing so much, and today I know so little, and it is so freeing. I don't have to know. I have the love for myself and forgiveness for myself to say, if there's something I don't know how to do, there is somebody in this room, I guarantee you, that knows how to do that thing. And I can be open to that. What really happened that really was hard is that when my two boys, as teenagers, started to experiment with drugs in Los Angeles, going to Venice High, this threw me out of alignment, to use a yoga phrase. And thank God I'd been in Al-Anon for a few years and had an Al-Anon sponsor. That's what I'll say about that. And just to let you know, if you're brand new to AA, welcome. I forgot to welcome any newcomers. I'm so sorry. I usually do that. Also, to let you know that I'm not a paid speaker for Al-Anon or AA or Al-Anon or any of the 12 steps. I'm just a member. So if you don't like my share and it doesn't resonate for you, please go to another meeting. Eventually you'll hear your story. I'm just another member who's very human, full of mistakes and full of a lot of miracles too. And welcome. And there are 12-step programs. What I found out after coming to AA is, like, if you have financial problems, there's a 12-step for that. If you have relationship problems, sex and love problems, there's a 12-step for that. So Al-Anon is for the family members or friends who love alcoholics. So just by way of you being here, you qualify to be in Al-Anon as well, should it be something that you want to investigate. So it was introduced to me early on, since I came from an alcoholic addicted family, that I check it out, and it resonated for me. And so when my children started experimenting and using in my home, I learned how to have consequences and have boundaries for what I would tolerate and what I wouldn't, but also not to take it personal, also to not steal their drugs, because I was practicing a rigorous program of sobriety. That didn't occur to me until years later that I really did love the weed at one time, but never occurred to me to steal from my kids when I found it. We confiscated it, and mostly I handed it over to my husband, who does not have an alcohol or drug problem. And frankly, I don't know what he did with it after that. None of my business. But my kids did see me getting sober. I did tell them that I was going to, in the very beginning when they were young, I told them I was going to meetings to be a better mommy and to learn how to be a better wife and better sister and better friend and better daughter. And they understood that. And then when they were old enough, like my 2-year cake and 3-year cake and 4-year cake, they gave me my birthday cakes. In LA, we call it giving a birthday cake. And probably if you've been to enough meetings, you've heard that somewhere, anniversary. And what was really amazing is in the fall of 2019, both of my boys went into their own recovery for the very first time. My 16-year-old went to an adolescent living treatment center, and he was away from the house for 6 weeks. And my 18-year-old voluntarily went into a detox and then into an adult treatment center. And I knew that it wasn't my job to sponsor them. It wasn't my job to make sure that they were doing, like, calling their sponsor. or follow up on what meetings. I got to just love them and encourage them. And as a result, they invited me to meetings to watch them take their 30-day chip or their 60-day chip and their 90-day chip, which was such proud mom moments, right? They were starting to really get it. And in March of 2020, it was time for me to take a 10-year birthday cake. So I said, hey, how about I go to that Wednesday night speaker meeting at the Marina Center, which is a meeting I used to go to all the time when I was brand new. And you two boys can give me a cake. And they said, yeah, but in the car on the way there, they said, when you thank us for your cake, instead of saying, I want to thank my boys or I want to thank my sons, can you thank us by name? And that moves me to this day. I am so moved by that. They wanted to be affiliated, identified with me, their sober mom, taking a 10-year anniversary chip for 10 years sober. And also, they were 18 and 16. They were starting to flirt in the meetings. And I think they wanted people to know their name because they wanted to meet the girls. I know what kind of boys they were. So they also wanted to be known. Big deal in AA. So I did. I thanked them in my little 2-minute that I used their names. And my oldest son, Noah, who was 18 at the time, brought his sponsor and sat next to his sponsor and was proud of his mom. And that's what AA did for me. It gave my boys a sober mom who they could be proud of and show off to their friends and their sponsors. And 2 days later, all the meetings in LA shut down and we all went on to Zoom. And I'm so proud of LA. And I'm so proud of Kentucky. And I'm proud of Tennessee. And I'm proud of AA. We immediately went on to Zoom. And I think Al-Anon did too. And I probably think most of the 12 steps. We didn't wait for somebody from, World Service Central Office in our region to say it was okay. And here's the codes. We did it ourselves because we needed it. We knew that we needed the meetings. We needed the meetings to be there. And I started going to all my meetings. In fact, I started a couple of meetings as well. And my youngest son, Toby, was at home and he was doing at the time I think it was like a IOP, outpatient, some kind of intensive therapy program that he was doing. And Noah was in his living, treatment center. And Noah, unfortunately, didn't like Zoom meetings. I don't even think he went to one. And he hated being locked up in his room and all of his meetings suddenly went away. And he tried to hang and he tried to stay, but he couldn't. And he checked himself out on March 19th, which was a few days after giving me a cake. And he relapsed shortly after. And he told his dad and me and his therapist and his sponsor and his brother he was just going to smoke weed and he wasn't going to go back to the pills and wasn't going to go back to the hard stuff anymore. But that's not what happened. He went online eventually, a couple weeks after his relapse, after he checked himself out from the treatment center. And when he was sleeping over at his cousin's house, he went online and bought some pills that were Percocet, but weren't Percocet. And he probably knew that it was fentanyl. And on April 21st, 2020, Noah lost his life to this disease. He was 18 years old and 8 months, and he had had one sobriety in him. He had managed to get to 120 days before he relapsed. I mean, really bad timing for that kid. He needed Zoom meetings, but he didn't know it. And he was in that angry, scared place that I probably was in, contempt prior to investigation. But I got to stay because there wasn't pandemic, there wasn't fentanyl. Who knows why I got to live, but Noah didn't make it. Noah died of this disease. And that royally sucks because he was a really special guy and he was really amazing and especially sober. Dynamite. I mean, in his journal, he never kept a journal, but at this sober living place, they made him write a few sentences every day. He talked about how he wanted to go into high schools and talk to kids about his story. And he wanted to even maybe go into middle schools and talk to kids younger than him. And he could have made a huge difference had he lived. And I know that I didn't cause it. I know it was genetically passed beyond me, from the ancestral. I was born into it. My father was probably born into it, my grandfather and great grandfather, and who knows how many hundreds of generations before. So I don't take responsibility for the disease, but I'm so, so grateful that I understand the disease. It is cunning and baffling and powerful. If I were powerful enough to to change the course of things, would I reverse it? Would I die instead? Because I know some parents that have lost kids say, why didn't they take me? I've had a great life, or I've had enough life. But then I thought that thought, and I thought, would I have wanted to do that to my kids, die an alcoholic death? It might have secured their death in alcoholism too, handing them that huge pile of grief. And what I've realized is that bargaining, by the way, is a really natural part of grieving. I've since learned a lot about grief. Grief is an amazing teacher. Um, but what I've learned, it is not up to me to figure out the why. Why him? Why not me? It's not a spiritual question. And so it's not a spiritual solution for me. What AA taught me in the first few months of my sobriety is to practice a gratitude list. And contempt prior to investigation, there's a theme here. And boy, I didn't even plan on that, but rolled my eyes at it, but did it anyway because my sponsor wanted me to. Attitude, if you can't see me on the screen. I did it, and it taught me a tool that I have come to rely on in this grief, is that I have been able to shift between deep pain and gratitude. I lost a son. I didn't lose a son. I don't like that word. Noah corrected me because I do have I do have contact with him, and he has spoken to me a few times. He tells me that he's not lost. He's not lost at all. He's at home. He is spiritually united with whatever's on the other side. He's whole. If anyone's lost, it's sometimes me and other humans that are bumbling around. So I have to admit that, that's my dishonesty. He's not lost. He's not lost. He left his physical body. Um, I was going somewhere with this. Oh, the gratitude. So the gratitude is that I got to have a Noah in my life. I got to have a son for 18 years and 8 months who taught me that I was capable of deep love. He's my firstborn. So if it had been Toby, that would have been Toby, the first one. But it was Noah who taught me that I was capable of that selfless, deep love that I never knew and never experienced as a child growing up with dysfunction and chaos and alcoholism and addiction and violence and neglect and abuse and blah, 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 blah. I didn't know that kind of love, but Noah gave me that opportunity. He cracked my heart open when he was born, and then it was cracked open even wider when he died. And instead of closing that heart down, I had become close enough with my AA family that I allowed myself to be absolutely carried during my time of devastation. I surrendered as if on a raft on a raging water river, and I allowed myself to be carried, partially because I didn't really at the moment care whether or not I lived or died. But I didn't think about ending my life. I wouldn't do that to my husband and my surviving son. I knew that that wasn't the solution, but I just thought, what else can I do? No human power can alleviate this pain. Why not just surrender? And I surrendered to the kindness. And it was said in my women's meeting, I do attend a beautiful women's meeting every Saturday morning here in LA. Kindness can be very transformative in these rooms, and kindness can be a balm for the soul in grief. And having our stories witnessed can be healing. And you guys have taught me that all along the course of my travels in AA. You guys have listened to my list of resentments and my list of horrible things that I did and my self-hatred. And then you listened while I surrendered to a new way. And then you told me about the way that you have surrendered or have been forced to surrender through calamity and tragedy. So I met Noah's death with a great deal of gratitude. I know a woman who lost her infant son, and she never got to see how his hair felt, the curls of it, or what his laugh sounded like as a 10-year-old, or how he kicked the soccer ball, or how he swam in the ocean for the first time. I have that forever. What a gift. If Noah had died at 6 months, I wouldn't have any of those touch points would be missing from my life. That makes up the fabric of my love for him and our experience of being on earth at the same time. I'm so grateful for those moments. And I'm so grateful for the last 10 years of his life. I was sober, so I remember those moments. Had I been drinking and had I been taking drugs where I wasn't present, it would be fuzzy and I would be full of remorse and guilt because not only then did I lose him, but then I lost all this time when he was here that I could have been there too. Thank God that's not my story today. I also got to see Noah sober, and that doesn't happen for a lot of us that have kids that have addiction. Noah only had one sobriety in him. He only had one relapse in him. That sucks royally. I don't like that. You know, I know that he was young, 18. There's a reason why we send 18s, you know, they're invincible. They think they know. Their brains are not fully formed. And Noah had some brain trauma due to being an incredible athlete and played soccer and football for almost his entire life. He listened to stories of the guys that he loved and emulated, and he heard them say things like, well, I went to treatment for 11 times, or, you know, I was in rehab 12 times. And I'm sure some of that sank in, but really, Noah thought he was going to be able to come back. But the truth is, none of us know, you know, on a relapse, whether it's alcohol or not. We don't know if this is our last sobriety we've got in us. So people say always keep coming back. But what I really pray is that we stay. If you're struggling and you have a lot of sobriety, stay and become new again. This is what happened to me after Noah died. I became a newcomer. I didn't use, I didn't drink, I didn't relapse, but I became desperate for the program. I called my sponsor every day. I went back into my gratitude list. I asked people, how do you do this? One of the first calls I made was to a woman who I knew that had lost her son in a car accident, not alcohol or drug related, but she stayed sober and she was a great deal older than me. And this had happened years and years, but she had shared about it in meetings. So I called her, I think probably on the day or the day after that Noah died. And I said, how do you do this? And she said, one day at a time. Don't you know, like the same thing that works for early sobriety works in deep grief, one day at a time. And if that's too much, chunk it down to 1 hour at a time. And if that's too much, one breath at a time. That's how we survive anything, any pain, any hardship, any fear, anything that's bouncing around on our heads. It's such a brilliant, like, it sounds trite and it sounds like it's not going to work on this. No, this is too complicated. No, this is too hard. No, if we take it one day at a time, we can do this. The other thing I heard is you're not alone. When I shared early on, you know, upon becoming a virtual newcomer again, not a literal, but a virtual newcomer again, they let me share in meetings every time. They didn't roll their eyes and say, oh, here she comes again. They let me share as much as I needed to about what I was experiencing in my grief. And I'm so grateful. I don't need to do that in my meetings as much. Sometimes I do, but just like we do, like we hold space for the newcomer who's scared what that means to be fresh and new in the program and not understand the way that this works and not sure that they can do it and are so afraid of failing. We have a lot of compassion because we were all there. We were all on day one, weren't we? And together we make such an amazing team. When you guys told me you don't ever have to do anything alone again, I didn't really take that seriously, but that's been the case. I haven't felt alone, not like in my later days of drinking. I was so alone. I was surrounded by family and I was lying to everybody and I felt so isolated and alone and lonely and so lonely in my last days of drinking. That loneliness hasn't reappeared. Grief hurts, yes, and grief is pain. And I long and miss and feel the absence of the people that are not in my life anymore, including some sponsees and some friends and some family members and Noah and other people's children who I've gotten to know through them. That's another amazing miracle that has happened by not drinking and showing up collectively to groups. Especially during the pandemic, I needed people and I prayed. Oh, that's another thing. I didn't let go of my 11 step prayer and meditation every day. Couldn't always meditate, but I learned two-way prayer, which helped me meditate for 5 minutes in between the two. And I'm happy to I'll leave my number in the chat and I can explain to you what that is at some later time. But I met these trudging buddies that are all bereaved moms, and we hung on to each other during 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and 2023 and now into 2024. And we are a tight-knit group of bereaved parents that have gone on retreats together and celebrate each other's children's birthdays on the other side, and the hard days like Mother's Day or anniversaries or our own birthdays. And I didn't handpick them, and I didn't even think that sobriety was like a qualifier for this, but today all four of us are sober, and two of them have more sobriety than me and one has less, and I'm right in the middle. That has to be a higher power that handed me this fellow traveling group. I'm not alone. We're never alone. And my higher power, sometimes when I see a sign for my son, and I do get signs, and I know that sounds woo-woo, but this is my spirituality and I'm allowed to own it. When Noah sends me a sign, sometimes I throw in higher power. Thank you for that, Noah. Higher power, or sometimes it's Great Spirit. And then I also say, or Papa, or Marky, or Paula, or Alexis, or Rod, are the people that I've lost. Like, they're all part of the collective. So that's become my higher power. Higher power is inclusive, and all the people that are on the other side can be in that collective. And so it doesn't matter if there's one entity or one consciousness that's hearing it. It's important that I know that it's not me, that it's something that's traveling to this realm so that I can see it in this physical realm. And that stuff carries me through. Now, if I was deep in grief and if I was shut down with a closed heart and I went to bed with a bottle and I didn't want to go to AA ever again, I didn't want to meet up with my traveling buddy of bereaved parents, or didn't want to be of service, I'd be looking down, I'd be inside the house, I'd be concave into myself, and I wouldn't be outside looking at all the miracles happening. And that's where I see my signs in nature, the way the light filters in through the trees, the way the light reflects off the car window, even when my water bottle is there and then it reflects a rainbow on the seat next to me. I have to be out and about looking around with my head up and outside to see the miracles. I can't be this and then expecting the miracles. Like, that might be penetrating, but it won't get through. I have to take the action, which is what the steps are. We have to take the action to do the admitting that we're powerless, and then to somehow believe that we're going to come to believe that we're going to be restored to sanity, to believe that by giving up our own personal power and our will and our life and what we think we're controlling, which, by the way, is, for me, was always delusional, what I thought I can control. Once I give up that delusion, what's available to me is a real clear-cut path for what I am responsible for and what I do have power over. And the fourth step is just an opportunity for me to take inventory to see what needs cleaning up, which is often my outrageous delusional fears that run rampant and create some bad behavior. When I am in fear, it's an activator of my character defects, which, wouldn't you know, I feel shameful about. So let's look at the underlying fears that perpetuate this. So that's what my fourth step has looked like, with a column that addresses a fear category next to every single resentment, because there's always an underlying belief for me, for this alcoholic. And that's been really a process for me getting clear about my belief system. And my beliefs have changed since I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had a number of spiritual awakenings, and I'm so grateful. I came in here so old and so tired. At 39, I was ancient and so sure that my best days were behind me. And around every corner was something more miraculous than I would have dreamed. When I was young, I wanted to be Lily Tomlin. Some of you are too young for this, but she had this skit where she was plugging in she was, I'll connect your call, please. And she was plugging people's calls into a big telephone operator. And I just love that plugging stuff in. And I was like 5 years old and I wanted to be a telephone operator. And then I got to be like 11, 12, 13, and I realized, oh, like that doesn't exist anymore, or maybe I should be something else with my life. And anyway, it went by the wayside. But I was in my musicians meeting and I was plugging in equipment into the soundboard that had 19 channels. And I was plugging these cords in and running the snake through and plugging them into microphones and mixing the music. And I was just blown away. And I thought, this is my dream as a little girl. This is what I wanted. And God made it happen, but it was like so much better than my 5-year-old self. It was like a stage with musicians and instruments. And I was behind the scenes mixing live sound. Like God heard my dream and then said, like, all right, you're getting sober. Let's see what you want to do with that dream. And then being an athlete, I didn't know I was an athlete until I was 42, to discover that I had endorphins and that I had dopamine and serotonin disfiguration because of the years of drinking and abuse to my body. And then this beautiful opportunity to become a teacher in a field that I was able to write my chemical balance myself and then encourage mainly other women who found their way into my gym and got to lovingly guide them into good health. And I met women that were recovering from cancer, breast cancer, and one woman with a hip replacement, and just hear their stories. I was raised by AA. So this is stuff that I learned in here. It wasn't stuff that didn't come up with on my own. I wasn't going to be becoming a music mixer and love live music or work with musicians or teach fitness. All of that have been gifts of AA. And, if it were up to me, I wouldn't have wanted 2 kids to get into drug use. And it wasn't up to me. It was their path. And I have to trust that their soul had a path. So when this started happening, when they started using, of course, we went to the therapist and we did family therapy and we had restrictions and grounded and all the things that you do as a loving parent. And I remember being in a meeting one day and I was like, I don't know if I can trust God with my kids, like, I can set aside prayer. Have you heard about the set aside prayer? And I'm like, no, I don't like that. And third step prayer over Noah, over Toby. And I'm like, I'm not sure, like that one, I'm not sure I'm willing to hand that one over. And a really beautiful, wise woman said to me, your kids aren't your kids, right? And I said, what? He said, those are God's kids. And you have been enlisted to be their guardian. And you have an opportunity to love and guide them.
Lori,
They
5
don't,
minutes.
thank you, Jay. They're not your kids. They were my kids. I have the stretch marks and the scars to prove it. They came from me. And by the way, if you have adopted children or you are adopted, that's valid too. Those kids exist and are really your kids as well. But it was a spiritual awakening to hear that it was a gift that I got to have these kids to love. Toby stayed sober through his brother's death. His only brother, his best friend, his using buddy. He stayed sober through that. He remained sober for some time. I don't frankly know. I hope he's still sober today. He's 20, living his own life. I don't know. It sure doesn't look like he's using because he doesn't have the terrible consequences. He also might not be an addict or an alcoholic, which is interesting. But also none of my business as long as I keep on staying in my own lane, right? And keep working on my own. But I practice the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous because I want this to be here should my younger son need it again one day, should my nephews, should the people that I love need Alcoholics Anonymous, let it be here for them. Let us stay, safe place for people to come. I'm grateful for my life today. I am so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. I am grateful to understand what the disease of alcoholism today. I also don't hate the disease of alcoholism. It's allowed me to have a spiritual awakening and a closeness to my divine higher power, who I thank for granting me these 2 boys in my life and my 3 nephews, who granted me an amazing life full of journeys that are still unfolding. I do believe that we can recover. And I also don't consider or call myself a recovered alcoholic, not for me. I'm only 14 years in and change, and I have a lot of learning to do about myself. I'm still finding character defects. Denial is thick sometimes with me. But as I become more teachable, I also become more free, and I want freedom. I'm also looking forward to seeing Noah again one day. I bring his book to every meeting. It's a way of me bringing him into the rooms. I just want to show you before I close that Noah was a better AA than me. All through the first 57 pages, he has highlights in gold and little connotations and things that meant something to him. Clearly, his sponsor had him do some annotating. But his last page that he has any marks on is page 57. And then page 58, some of you will know, is chapter 5, how it works. So he didn't get to work all the steps. Clearly, he didn't get to see the miracles that could happen in his life that I've had the pleasure of happening in my life. But through me speaking with you, he gets to have a 12-step. I get to tell part of his story. I get to use his story to help others. If you think you might be close to a relapse, please call somebody. You don't know if this is your last chance at sobriety, and please don't. It really hurts to lose somebody that you love, and I know that there's somebody that loves you deeply and whose life would be forever altered, and they might not be as lucky as me. They might not have the beautiful fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous to carry them through. So please think twice before you pick up a drink. Please, if you're struggling and you've been here a while and you feel lonely, pick up the phone and pretend like you don't know anything about the program and be willing, because there's a lot of love, so much love. We get it. And the pain could come after 30 years of sobriety. That's what happened to my friend Rod. He's not with us any longer either. But I do love this program. I hope that's come across. Thank you again, Jay, for being, first of all, a dear friend and inviting me to share part of my story, part of Noah's story. And there's much more I want to share, but we're running out of time. So you guys have to just tune in next time and hear what the next speaker says. So I love you, even though I don't know many of you. I love you, and I hope you stay. Please stay. Thank you.